On to today's sessions, I'm going to introduce our 5 panelists who are going to give a brief presentation about each of the programs and talk a little bit about exec ed in general. First, we have Dana Bourne, who is a senior lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and the faculty chair of Senior Executive Fellows Program. Malcolm Sparrow is a professor of the practice of public management at the Harvard Kennedy School and faculty chair of the Strategic Management of Regulatory and Enforcement Agencies program. Next, Kesley Hong is a senior lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and faculty chair of Negotiation Strategies, Building Agreement Across Boundaries program. Chris Robichaux is the senior lecturer in ethics and public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School and faculty chair of the Leadership and Character in Uncertain Times program. And finally, we have Roger Porter, who is the IBM professor of business and government at the Harvard Kennedy School and faculty chair of the Senior Managers in Government program. I thank you all for being here today and being with us. Dana, I believe you're first to go, and I want to say good morning to you and hand the floor over to you. Over to you, Dana.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dan. And it's such a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are when you're listening to this. It is an honor also to be part of this panel of faculty chairs who lead executive education programs at the Harvard Kennedy School. I know we all are joined in appreciation for you who are in the arena and devoting yourselves to adding public value and making the world a safer, braver, more just, fairer place. Thank you for joining us. I am the faculty chair for the Senior Executive Fellows Program. I see you have in front of you a quick description, and it's primarily oriented towards people who are in the GS 14, 15 on their way to senior executive service level, or military ranks of 04, 05, 06 on their way to flag or general rank. And it's also true that it's for our international partners and militaries as well. And the focus really is on a program that has evolved every year for over 40 years. And it's devoted towards your professional and personal development. Now, how we go about this is really recognizing the types of challenges that you face, particularly now, looking at management and leadership in crisis and innovating in this really what some have called a VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what we try to do is focus on multiple topics aligned with the executive core qualifications, all of them for U.S. government. And then because of our international partners and because of innovating, we go well beyond that. It's a 4-week-long program where you are invested with many other people from across the globe. And in this capacity, you're working very closely together in the large room, we call it, with the entire cohort. And we also have small groups where you are working in a more intimate peer coaching and mentoring group. And then there's obviously a lot of individual work that you will be doing as well, because development is your own personal readiness, your experience in pushing yourself a little bit in that growth zone, and then that time for reflection. Now, there are, I would say, 4 C's that we focus on primarily. But before giving you the end in mind, I want to share that one of our approaches for you and with you is to think about leadership as both the leader, who is you, and your own personal human capacity and capabilities, and also leadership, which is more the social capacity building, the connective tissue to be able to adapt and to make collective impact together. So we differentiate leader and leadership, but they clearly go together. Now, this process we have at the John F. Kennedy School of Government is the quote from President Kennedy was, "Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other." So in this learning community, the 4 C's, I will say, are the most important that we will measure ourselves by at the end. Are the first, this opportunity that you have for incredible connection, which is building this network of people that are across agencies and actually across countries and even across sectors, because we have 20% who are private sector, nonprofit, and global. So the second C is competency, and that is really building this common language and frameworks. Many of these frameworks are by the faculty who you will hear from today, who all teach in the program, and original work that emanates from their research, scholarship, and practice. And this common language and competency is really giving people that agency to be able to take on this VUCA world and create change together. And then the final C, or final two C's, one is commitment. And it's actually because we recognize that so many people serving in the government are tired and are sometimes burnt out and sometimes need to be reinvigorated for that important role that you fill. And so this recommitment is also this re-inspiration for how important what you do is. And then finally, I added the fourth C, but I think it's important, and I think my colleagues would say as well, curiosity. We want you to even grow in terms of your curiosity, your wonderment, your reflective engagement, your questioning and asking good questions in this journey of learning. So I will look forward to your questions, but I think we can say that by the feedback that we get from people who culminate their experience in the Senior Executive Fellows and our SEF alumni, they're still part of this dynamic learning with us as we invite them back for every program so that community grows, the learning continues, and that recommitment continues as well. And our ratings come back saying that indeed people are enjoying all these benefits of growing in their knowledge, in their skills, and in who they are as people and professionals, both individually and collectively. So I think I'll wrap with that. And again, I'll finish with that gratitude again. Thank you for listening. Thank you for considering our programs. And you'll hear more about some of the faculty that teach in this 4-week-long program who are also panelists here in their distinctive specialty areas. So I'll hand it back to you now, Dan, and then over to Malcolm.
Thank you, Dana. Yes, over to you, Malcolm.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Dan, for setting this up. It's great to be able to reach out to the broader federal audience. I'm also very grateful to Dana in SEF and Roger in SMG, who allow me to do very short modules, sort of introducing my subject to their bigger classes. And then it's quite often that people say, oh, this is about me. And then they choose to come on my 1-week program, which is much more closely focused on distinctive challenges that they face. So what is the subject? I think the simplest way of understanding who comes and who doesn't is we can split government in half, roughly in half. About half of government is in the service delivery business. They're providing education systems and healthcare and welfare and transportation infrastructures, and the citizens are the customers. And all the lessons about high quality customer service work just fine and are pretty instructive. But then there's the other half, relatively neglected in my view. The other half are in business to protect society against threats or harms or problems or risks of various kinds, be it terrorism or building collapses or doing airplane safety, transport safety, tax administration, policing, intelligence, security. All of these are basically in the risk control or harm reduction business. And they form an anomaly in the context of a broader customer-driven government, because the people at the pointy end of your operations aren't necessarily the people you're trying to make happy. Actually, often you're trying to control their behavior. And you have the coercive power of the state, you have law or regulation or enforcement powers over them. And that's a very, that's a different set of challenges, it's a different set of people. If the first half of government is criticized for the uses and abuses of money, this half of government is criticized more often for the uses and abuses of power. You can put people out of business, you can deprive them of their liberty, you can even take their life, and it's for the sake of bigger, broader public purposes. So that's the crew. And we have been convening that half of government, people who know they're in that half, now more than 40 times over 25 years. They all have different sciences. So they're in environmental protection, or they're in cyber security or tax administration. And they're experts in their technical sciences. But my conviction for 25 or 30 years working with them is that there's an enormous amount that they can learn from each other across these different domain lines. With decades of exposure to that group, I've learned some things about them. I'll mention three very quickly. First of all, they're sort of miserable people by nature. I mean, there's tension in their professional role. It's not about making everybody happy. In fact, I think you can make the case that if you're dealing with a regulatory issue, if there was a resolution of the problem that actually made everybody perfectly happy, then this is not an issue that even needs regulation. Let the market figure out a negotiated solution. The whole point of regulation typically is that somebody is taking a loss to their short-term private or economic interests for the sake of a bigger, broader public good. And they're not always pleased to see you. It's a knock on the door that they're not necessarily looking forward to. So to understand that feature of the professional life seems to me a critical starting point. Second, they're often not much appreciated by the public. The public seem to understand that when a building collapses or a plane crashes, it's obviously a regulatory failure. Where were you? Why didn't you get ahead of this and step in and prevent it? That's one state of the world that the public understands. The other state of the world they seem to think they understand is that when nothing bad has happened for as long as they can remember, in which case regulation is nothing but a pain. Damaging business, getting in the way. We need red tape reduction or deregulation. They sort of forget why we need these sensible protections in the absence of a catastrophe. Notice how binary it is. It's all or nothing. Where were you? Or we don't know really why we need you. Very complicated for regulators in the absence of catastrophe to establish the right level, a sensible level of commitment, of budget, of fear to get the job done. And the third thing I have learned is that there's not much instruction available for practitioners in this area. There's a huge amount of academics, tens of thousands of them working on regulatory policy. That's the writing of the rules. They are mostly lawyers who do framing of legal structures, and economists that do all the cost-benefit analysis on rules that might come, on rules that might go. But the assumption seems to be that once the rules are in place, everything else follows in a straightforward fashion. It is absolutely not true. Practitioners live in between the rules as written in policy and the protections as delivered to the public. You're in the middle of the sandwich, and life is incredibly complicated and rich in terms of how you set yourself up, which laws you focus on, how you go about your business, whether to be tough and friendly, cooperative, when to use functional programs and process management, and when to focus on specific and emerging risks. Our goal in this program is to draw all of those people, and if you're one of them, you'll know by now, this will have resonated with you. Draw you all together and focus on all the issues and ambitions and frustrations that you have in common. And what we hope to be able to say at the end of a week is that, one, we had paid honor to the importance of the professional regulator. Second, that we had begun at least to grapple with the complexity of all the choices and the management of discretion and organizational design that goes with the role of a professional regulator. And third, a byproduct, we hope that people feel better personally about the role of quite apart from being experts in their science. Now they will also feel better about being a professional regulator too. If you're one of those, we'd love to have you join us on this program.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Malcolm. Kesley, we're going to hand it over to you to talk about the negotiations program.
Great. Thanks, Dan, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Along with my negotiation faculty colleagues, I work with senior federal government leaders, as well as leaders from the nonprofit and private sectors in our negotiation strategies program. I also teach in Professor Bourne's Senior Executive Fellows Program, and we sometimes put together custom programs to help federal agencies prepare for their upcoming negotiations. In our work, we've noticed several key challenges, and we've developed some learning goals to address them. So one of the first challenges we notice is that many of our federal government participants see negotiation as a sort of side activity that they have to engage in periodically, but that's something that's outside the primary focus of their job. And many people feel uncomfortable with the idea of negotiating, and they just want to get it over with as quickly as they can so that they can return to their area of expertise. Our program builds on the work of the psychologist Carol Dweck on the growth mindset. So we really believe that we all have the capacity to improve our performance through targeted practice, feedback, reflection, effort, and persistence. And we work to help you gain comfort with negotiation through preparation, frequent simulations, and structured feedback to help you build a reflective practice that you can apply to your own real-world negotiations. Our goal is to help you better understand yourself and how you're perceived by others and gain comfort. In a related vein, when we run a custom program for an organization, or when we sometimes have multiple participants from the same organization in one of our programs, we work to help you cultivate community bonds and a shared vocabulary in order to help you develop a negotiation support unit that you can continue to turn to for advice within your own organization as you face future negotiations. A related challenge is that many negotiators understand their own organization's perspective, needs, interests, alternatives, and constraints, but they don't always have a solid understanding of the perspective of other players. And they sometimes fail to recognize all of the stakeholders that might be affected by their decisions. What that can mean is that sometimes unanticipated challenges can arise and negotiators might feel blindsided. So we work with our participants to examine a broad range of possible stakeholders to better understand the structure and cultural context of a particular negotiation setting, and to gather information about other perspectives so that we can help them map backwards from their end goals to figure out a path forward to meet them. We're working with you to develop a broad toolkit of strategies that you can use in many different situations and to help you consider diverse sources of power in negotiation. And finally, particularly in politically charged negotiations, sometimes it can feel like the other side is playing hardball, or you might feel like you're at an impasse. And we work with you on strategies to move past roadblocks, build trust, and find ways to creatively expand the pie of value so that you can move forward even when you're stuck. Across all these areas, the feedback we've received from past participants has indicated that the strategies that we work to develop during the program can prove useful not just in your professional situations, but also in your personal negotiations with family and friends.
Excellent. Thank you, Kesley, very much. Over to you, Chris.
Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for taking the time to join us today as we talk about our programs. I'm the faculty lead for leadership and character in uncertain times, and this program is really meant to open its arms and bring in everyone who is interested in wrestling with the difficulties of the current moment, especially when it comes to moral conflict and disagreement in a leadership setting. If you have gotten the sense of moral disorientation, that the world is coming apart at its hinges, how do we make any progress going forward? What the heck is going on with the people who are in charge? This program tries to give you a set of skills that will help you begin to make sense of that. These are uncertain times, and there are times in which it's becoming increasingly more difficult for us to learn how to collaborate and cooperate with people who disagree with us about fundamental values. So I take very seriously the need for practice in that space. It doesn't come easily, and often it's involves dragging people kicking and screaming. But all the same, it is absolutely crucial. And there's also no way to avoid this. One of my experiences teaching for many years now is that we like to think that we can put the ethical disagreement, the moral disagreement to the side and just get everything else done. And then, if we have time, we'll get to this in the end. That's not how the world works. Value disagreement and value conflict emerges naturally. I don't need to tell any of you this. I'm coming at you from my office in my family home in Ohio, where I have been, except for a little bit of time, confined for 14 months. I've been confined here for 14 months because of COVID. What is one of the themes that has emerged over the past 14 months with COVID? More than that now, right? It's about a year and a half. This real disagreement in the public between emphasizing safety, right, and emphasizing health. Those are value assessments, and different people are going to, I mean, that's obviously a vast oversimplification, but it emerges again and again. I care more about safety and health. The other side of it is freedom. So it's safety and health on one side, freedom on the other. I want my freedom. I want my health. You know, they're both good things to have. How do we settle in on which one to choose? Well, there's obviously no one answer to that. Reasonable people, I say this so often, but it's worth hearing. Reasonable people can reasonably disagree about what the right way is going forward with a value conflict. So this program is meant to give us some room to explore that in a variety of different ways. It's a 5-week program. We learn through cases, we learn through small group conversations, we learn through large group conversations. There are 2 live sessions per week, which involves me working with everyone on these issues. There are small group works each week. Besides the cases, there's also a simulation in which you have to make some hard choices with other people, and then you have to step back and say, you know, what did I end up choosing here? And what's my explanation for the choices that I made? Really quickly, the broad framing is we look at leadership through the lens of adaptive leadership. I really like that framework as a way of looking at problems within society, within organizations, within teams that no one really wants to talk about. And no one really wants to talk about these problems because they're not easy to solve. There's not an expert in the room who can solve them for us. They're the things that we sort of just put aside. We all know it's there. We don't know what to do about it. A lot of problems in ethics are adaptive problems as well. So we introduced that framework, and we look at a case. Currently, we're looking at Aung San Suu Kyi, a case that keeps developing. And I mentioned that case just because, you know, that's a complicated case. People have strong opinions on a lot of different fronts about Aung San Suu Kyi. We also then move on over the course of the 5 weeks to talking about ourselves a little bit, and how we can learn about ourselves and the values that we have, the values we think we have, the values we actually have, the role of storytelling and fiction at times in informing us about our values. I don't think that that's something that we can ignore. I think that narrative, both actual life narrative and fictional narrative, can be extremely helpful in helping us wrestle with hard moral questions. So yes, let me just answer it. If you're wondering, with the Captain America shield and the Wonder Woman behind me and all the rest, do we ever cover superheroes? There is one portion of this where you talk about superheroes briefly. Now, hopefully that doesn't send you screaming and running for the doors. Hopefully that gets a lot of you like totally psyched. I have strong opinions on superheroes, but I'm open to yours as well. We look at how to confront moral disagreement through civil discourse. We look at how to mobilize people and see things from a variety of different perspectives. We look at how to have really hard conversations about social justice and change. One of the cases we look at is the Eric Garner case. And I have participants in this program who are both involved in law enforcement and who are activists on the street. And we create a condition of civility in which we really try to, wrestle with our different ways of approaching these very, very hard problems. The program does not suggest that at the end of it, you get a 3-step recipe, follow these 3 easy steps, and you will resolve all of your moral conflicts and disagreements. But it does give you a really intensive practice in wrestling with hard moral questions in public leadership from a variety of different fronts. And a lot of good friendships are made, and a lot of good teams are built out of it. So I have a tremendous amount of time, fun time doing it, and I would love to have you be a part of it. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. And let's go over to our last presentation and insights from Roger Porter. Roger, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think you can get a flavor for why I enjoy teaching at this Kennedy School as much as I do, because of the quality of the colleagues that one has, and also the quality of participants and students that arrive at the Kennedy School. Whenever you're beginning anything, you develop a set of expectations, what you think you're going to be getting out of it. And one of the interesting things about the Senior Managers in Government program is that it provides an opportunity for you to interact with a group of fellow participants most of whom have spent fairly long careers in government. They've made it up to the top reaches of the various departments and agencies and bureaus and governments in which they participate. They have a good deal of experience, some of which is similar to yours, some of which is different from yours. And we tend to draw for faculty on people who likewise have had a good deal of experience in government, as well as experience in academia. So you're thrown into a mix of people who you can relate to, who you can learn from, and whom you can teach. I think one of the great delights of life is that every day we have both an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to teach. And that's certainly true in the executive programs that we've been talking about today. Most of you find yourselves working and living in a world filled with very high expectations. Expectations about performance for you and your organizations. You also live in a world in which there is a very dramatic increase in the level of activity. We feel like we're rushing from one thing to another, that we're drinking from a fire hydrant, that we hardly have time to pause and reflect and look at the larger picture. So one of the purposes of the Senior Managers in Government program is to help people who are at the top of government step away with a group of people who find themselves in a similar situation as they are and look at some of the larger and bigger issues. And we tend to do this in three parts. One is to look at some current challenges. We've all been through in the last year and a half a challenge that is relatively unique for about a century, dealing with a global pandemic. What have we learned from it? What kinds of ways have we learned how to innovate? And so we start out the program by looking at this phenomenon of innovation in modern organizations and how we have handled the capacity to adjust and adapt and innovate with respect to dealing with the pandemic. I've actually been very impressed with the way in which the Kennedy School has done this. This has been a big adjustment in terms of pedagogy. And Dana has done a spectacular job with the Senior Executive Fellows Program, as have Chris and Kesley and Malcolm, in adjusting and adapting to a new way of interacting and a new way of teaching. We also are in a time in which there is a lot of transition in the United States. We've just had a transition with a new administration, a large number of political appointees who are coming in fresh, which means that thinking about the relationship between the permanent government, the career civil service, and political appointees is a very current challenge. We spend time talking and thinking about that. So we tackle, in part in the program, how are we doing with respect to innovating and how are we doing with respect to handling the relationships between political appointees and career civil servants. Secondly, we try to step back and look at some of the big issues that are with us all the time. How do we make decisions in large, complex organizations? How do we devise and develop and execute a strategy? How do we measure the performance of our organizations more clearly and more effectively? How do we deal with risk control, given the fact that the expectations for performance are very high? And if you look at the last 20, 30 years in society, it's not just the public sector, but the private sector. The idea of risk control and controlling risks has risen dramatically. What's the position of the United States in the world? And we have a variety of people, from the former Secretary of Defense to one of the leading authorities in the world on China, to one of the key figures in the national security community, who will do a module looking at the relationship of the US and the world. And then third, and finally, and not least, what are a set of skills that we all have to some degree, but which we can all develop and refine and improve? Skills in doing what Kessley does so effectively, negotiating and thinking about how we can reach negotiated solutions. Skills in communicating, and we have both sessions dealing with written communications. How do we do that more effectively? And how do you communicate your organization's message to a broader community in a world in which there is so much out there that everybody is trying to get more airtime? How do you deal with that? And how do you persuade those that you're working with and those whom you are serving and those whom you must get authority and resources from, to persuade them to move in the direction that you want to do? In short, unlike some programs, this is Senior Managers and Government Program is very broad gauged. It's designed for people who are at the top in the US and abroad, who have to think about the large picture, the big picture, and yet who have to concretely figure out how we're going to deal with particular problems that arise on a day-to-day basis. I measure the success of these programs in part by the communications that we receive from people months, often years after the program has ended, who write to say that something that they learned or that they first thought about in one of these programs is something that they have put into practice frequently and successfully in the work that they do in their governments all around the world. Back to you, Dan. We look forward to responding to any questions that you may have.
Roger, thank you so much. And thank you to the entire faculty panel. I just have two more slides I want to cover, and then we'll field some questions. So this slide, we've heard about these five particular programs that are uniquely positioned to help the federal workforce. These are some other programs that we thought you may wish to consider. And rather than reading them to you, which you can do on your own, I will say two things. One is that we are continuously innovating. We are developing some new programs in areas of need, particularly on this list. The Persuasive Communications program is brand new. So first time we had a communications program. So we are developing and rolling out new programs all the time. The second point I want to make is that on the website, there's a suite of programs, including this list and the programs we've heard about. There's a wonderful way where you can toggle between topic or type of person who should attend these programs, who the audience is. So using those ways where you could toggle the program list to really narrow it down and find what you're looking for is really super helpful. So again, some other programs you may wish to consider in addition to the ones we've heard about here. But there's a whole suite of them online. And what we can do is we can put the link for maybe all the programs in the chat. You can also get that on the website, and maybe we can send that out after. So next slide, please. I just want to talk very briefly about the executive core qualifications and the executive certificate here at the Kennedy School. ECQs, most folks probably on this call are familiar with the Office of Personnel Management's ECQs. We have aligned a lot of our curriculum and a lot of our program to these. I just do want to note it doesn't guarantee completion of an ECQ to take this, but you'll find that a lot of the programs in the curriculum do align with this. There's actually an alignment grid or matrix on the website as well available to you if you want to learn more about that. So that might be important too. The executive certificate, the Harvard Kennedy School Executive Ed Office does have an executive certificate. If you complete 3 programs within 6 years, you can earn yourself an executive certificate in one of these 4 concentration areas. All of the programs we've heard about today will qualify you towards one, if not more, of these, and they're economic development, nonprofit leadership, and public policy. You also get a 10% discount calculated based off the lowest tuition, which will be applied to the final program which you apply. So it's 3 programs in 6 years. And this is a nice added benefit to the certificate of completion you get at the end of each course or each program. So what I want to do now is I will turn it over to my colleague, Amber. And Amber, I think, is going to field some questions back out to the faculty and myself, or to herself if need be. So Amber, over to you.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks again to the panelists. We've had a few questions about admission, so I thought I'd just talk briefly about just kind of our general application process, and then maybe ask a couple of the faculty to talk about kind of the profile of people that we see in your specific programs or in executive in general. So for an application perspective, each program has an individual application, and each program goes through a rigorous application process. So we review applications as they come in, but you do have to apply to an individual program to be considered. The application is very straightforward. We ask some personal data questions, and then we ask you to write a couple essays kind of identifying what your role is currently, and also talking about the strategic challenges that you're facing in that role that are relevant to the program that you're applying for. We want to make sure that you're applying to a program that is going to be beneficial to you, but that you're also bringing your insights and your expertise from your professional experience into the classroom, because that's really important to us. You're not just learning from the front of the room, you're learning from your peers in the classroom as well. Most of our programs are looking for participants who are at least mid to senior level. We have a few programs that are for up and coming leaders in the field, but most of our programs are focused in that mid to senior level kind of grouping in terms of professional experience. Dana, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of profiles in terms of what we see in terms of sectors, like I said, experience, and then maybe also Malcolm, you have kind of a more focused program as well. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Amber, and thanks for talking to the leadership challenge part of that application process, because that is actually one of the wonderful parts of the Senior Executive Fellows Program, where each person coming into the program is bringing with them their leadership challenge as they're describing what they're wrestling with. And it becomes kind of the salient part of how do I listen, how do I learn, and how do I contribute in helping with my own leadership challenge and understanding about it, but also how do you help with others? And so the program over 4 weeks is actually designed for that. And so, people are going to be pulling in and practicing, the regulatory controls of government from Professor Sparrow, and the negotiations from Professor Hong, and the, ethics and decision-making from Professor Robichaud, and the policy development from Professor Porter. And they're going to be thinking, how do I apply all this to my own challenge? But also, how do I use my ears and my wisdom and my experience to help apply that to my colleagues as well, particularly in the study groups. What's interesting is people are all over in terms of what their challenges are. Some people, just in a recent program, we're trying to deal with, we got so much money, we're trying to figure out how to handle that. And others are going to be on the opposite. We just had our budget cut significantly. How are we going to deal with that? And some people, it's about leading, as Professor Porter was talking about, when you have people who are in interim positions during transitions. And so we've got transitions and elections and governing as well that they're applying to that. So who do we have in the classroom? Mostly in the Senior Executive Fellows Program, we have federal employees who are relatively senior at the GS 14, 15, and maybe senior executive level. And we also have people who are in transition. They're finishing their government tours and they're thinking about that next chapter for them that might be in the nonprofit or private sector. We have some, as I mentioned, 20% typically who are that level, but around the globe, we have many different countries always represented, and also military, senior leaders in militaries from around the world. Sometimes in the classroom, we have countries that are, at us. And so we're working together, within the classroom towards the same learning objectives, which is absolutely tremendous for learning and leading and growth. So it's, there's not one size fits all, although the Senior Executive Service Fellows Program is mostly those senior level executives. But again, all across all sectors. So I'll hand it over now to you. I think it was to Malcolm next.
Hi. Thanks, Amber, for the question. Our class is typically 65 to 80 people, heavily international, 15 to 20 countries. Typically, we get large contingents from Canada, Ireland, England, Holland, UAE, Australia and New Zealand, at least the ones that can bear to be studying in the middle of the night. The obvious, in terms of federal government, the obvious types of agency are social regulators of every different stripe, law enforcement agencies, security agencies, and intelligence operations, because by virtue of the mission of the agency, they belong in this crowd. But we also have people who play particular risk control roles within other agencies. So for instance, inspectors general at the federal level, they are internal regulators. It's just that your regulated community is the agency itself. But they absolutely belong. And even though most of these folks are middle to very senior levels, we also have some specialist roles. We get some highly analytic people because of the role of analysis, intelligence analysis, risk analysis, in terms of vigilance about emerging risks, pattern recognition, anomaly detection, organizing around them. The analytic component of the course is significant enough to attract the specialists as well.
Thank you both. And I'll just add, just to kind of echo what Malcolm was saying about the senior, the Strategic Management, Regulatory and Enforcement Agencies program, just the internationalness of the program. I would say that's true for almost all of our programs, just the diversity and the global audience that's coming. So as a participant in the program, you really get to know a lot of people from around the world. You get to benefit from their experiences that they've had in other contexts. And you really get a chance to develop a great global network. And that's kind of across all of our programs. I also just wanted to ask you guys to talk a little bit about, we've had this transition to online out of necessity. We will be going back to on campus eventually and, continuing an online portfolio. So maybe Chris and Kesley, you guys can talk a little bit about the similarities, differences between online and on campus programming.
Kesley, why don't you jump in and I'll follow up.
Sure, thanks, Chris. So I guess I would start my answer by just kind of revisiting the previous question, which was about applications, right? And instead of thinking of it from the perspective of whom are we selecting, I'd like you to think for yourself about the timing of when you apply and when you're ready to apply. So our program in particular is extremely stimulation heavy, but every program that we have is highly interactive. It's not just you sitting there in person listening to a lecture or via Zoom watching some person on a screen spouting these pearls of wisdom. They really rely on you to engage with the material, to be willing to make yourself vulnerable, to come in and be prepared, and to work with your groups, giving advice and feedback. And so I think whether it's in person or online, you should apply at a time when you can give your whole self and all of your attention and focus to the program, so that you can not only have a rich and rewarding learning experience for yourself, but so that you're ready to contribute to your classmates' learning. And I think that online, we try to be extra careful for that. So when we're in person, everyone is usually physically, geographically separated from their day-to-day life and their work and their families, and they sometimes might get phone calls or emails, but we try and kind of turn off those electronics in the classroom. When we're online, you're often in the middle of your living room, as many of us are. I'm in my living room right now, right? There might be children nearby. You might have the pressures of work sort of right around you. And so we would just ask you, especially for an online program, to be extra thoughtful about knowing that when you're in our program, this is a space for you to dedicate to learning, and you can give us your full attention. I think that one thing that's been a pleasant surprise for all of us is just how seamless in many ways, because of the hard work our dedicated exec ed support teams have put in to making that transition be really seamless. And so because our programs are so interactive, it doesn't feel like there's this huge physical distance between us. I mean, I think the biggest difference is we don't give you coffee at coffee breaks, and we can't share meals together because that's hard to do online, but we're still having those small group conversations. They set up these virtual hallways after class for people to chat or ask questions. We have a lot of small group breakouts, so we're still getting that kind of high touch personal connection. It's just looking a little bit different. I appreciate being online. We do a lot of small group work where we used to be chasing people all over the different buildings, trying to find them and round them back up. And online, it's so great with the Zoom breakout rooms. You can just click a button and everyone's back with you in that minute. So in some ways, the online has been easier. I guess the other thing is to just look at the difference in time zones. And so, you know, we've tried for our online programs to keep them within a narrower time band so that they're accessible to people from more time zones, but just look at the timing of the program and see if it's something that's going to really work for you and if you'll be able to stay awake. Chris, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Thanks. So that's awesome, Kesley. I will first just piggyback on one thing that you mentioned, which is we really have found that you can do a lot online that maybe we weren't as optimistic about, weren't as sanguine about earlier. But you can build networks online. You can build a lot of personal connections online. You can even do fun things. I mean, most everyone this year has met my cats at some point. I'm shocked that they're not here now. Usually they like to show up when the camera is on. I'm just going to focus on a different sort of a strength of one versus a strength of other for the type of programs that I run. As I mentioned, I run programs that force us to look really hard at moral disagreement in a public service setting. And moral disagreement is tough. No one loves moral disagreement. We wish that we didn't have to make value trade-offs, or we wish that everyone saw things the same way. One of the things that's really good about in-person, and I'll say like the difference between in-person and online, one of the things that's really good about in-person, this is to echo what Kesley said, is everyone is together for a week. And in a sense, you can just put the rest of the world aside as best as you can. And that environment can be very conducive to putting the rest of the world aside, rolling up one's sleeves and saying, all right, this is hard, this is tough, we've got a week. These folks are all, peers and friends, we can do this. And that can be really advantageous. That sort of like, let's close off the world, let's escape for a little bit and focus on this very hard and challenging and rigorous work. And then we go and return to the world. I think that is an advantage to in-person learning, especially for a week that's not quite captured online. On the other hand, the work that I do with participants is rigorous and tough, and it really could use more than a week to digest. And so I really love the fact that Leadership in Character in Uncertain Times is 5 weeks long, and there's like a case a week or a simulation a week, and folks have time to process and digest and think about and come back with more questions. It's just really hard to do that in 1 week's time. It can feel absolutely overwhelming. So what do I prefer? Everything. I prefer it all. My whole course is about trade-offs, and here I am refusing to make one. But the point is, there are advantages to both, and at least I surface them for you just so that you can make an informed choice about where you want to go.
Thank you both. Roger, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about, we had some questions in the Q&A about how we use cases and other materials in the programs. And since you brought it up when you were talking about SMG, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how we use the case study method, kind of the purpose behind it, and kind of some examples of some cases that you might use in SMG.
Thank you very much. And we do rely heavily on case studies, although not exclusively, as a teaching device, in part because they present a real world question or challenge that is often familiar to people because it's similar to the kind of challenge that they often face in their work. And it gives them the opportunity to do two things. One, to consider a set of study questions that are circulated in advance. So before you would come to a class session, you would have read the case and you would have received a set of study questions to prompt your thinking about it. And then at the beginning of each day, we have study groups in which you would meet with a small number of other participants to go through the 3 cases that would be discussed during that day, and to compare notes and to offer your insights on it. And very frequently people say, that's a great insight. You want to make that in the larger group when we all get together later today. So it's a combination of real world case studies primarily based on actual experiences, study questions to help prompt your thinking about it beforehand, small group discussions to get your ideas fermenting, and then a faculty-led larger group discussion. So it's an iterative way of helping you to process and get out the most that you can for your current situation. I often remind students, everybody's going to take away different things from this program. There's not a particular set of things that we want you to take away. What we want you to do is to take the particular circumstances that you face and interact with interesting subject matter and constantly be asking yourself the question, how do I apply this to the world in which I live? And we can learn a lot from people who come from different agencies, different departments, different countries, who have different sets of experiences. And they're all grappling with it in one way or these challenges in one way or another. But at the end of the day, each participant is responsible for what they're going to get out of the program. We provide a rich smorgasbord, a fabulous menu, but how much you eat and how much that eating benefits you is in large part a function of what you put into it and what you invest in it. And that's why I would underscore what Kesley and Chris have mentioned, which is when you are participating in one of these programs, you need to have a minimum of distractions and a maximum of focus and attention, because you'll get a lot more out of it that way. Hope that's helpful.
Very helpful. Thanks, Roger. I just want to clarify a couple of things that came up just logistically. Our programs vary in length, especially right now when we're online. Some are a week intensive where you have 3 to 4 sessions a day online. Others are 5 to 10 to 20 weeks in length, where you might have 1 live session or 2 live sessions a week. So right now, kind of all of our programs are a little bit different in structure, based on kind of the topic of the program that you're interested in. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at the individual program websites to get a better sense of the format of the program and the kind of calendar that goes along with it. I also just want to clarify too, for the executive certificates that Dan mentioned, you would apply individually to the programs themselves. And then in that third program, that's when you'd be eligible for the executive certificate. So there's not like an executive certificate program that you apply for, you apply individually to the programs. That's kind of the questions that we have. So Dan, I'll turn it back over to you to kind of wrap us up.
Great. Thanks, Amber. And just one closing thought, and I want to speak to the role of the program director as it supports the wonderful work of the faculty. Is that someone wrote in the chat, is there someone I can talk to figure out what program is best for me? And the answer is absolutely yes. Please do reach out to a program director. We'd love to hear from you. Each program director has a suite of programs, but we are trying to put the right people in the right program. And each program director has knowledge of the entire suite. And so not only do we love to get you in the right program, we love to hear what sort of challenges you're facing. You have your ears to the grindstone. So tell us what's going on out there and what your challenges are and what you're facing. And we'd love to hear from you. So with that, I want to thank Dana and Chris, Kesley, Roger, and Malcolm for this. Thank you so much for taking the time and energy to be with us today.